Is Russia losing the war? And this is a question a lot of people have. And there are some people who believe that Russia is, but I wouldn't be so sure about that. I'm actually convinced Russia is going to win this war. It didn't go as planned, it didn't go as expected, but that's how war always is. You can't always expect war to go as planned. And if you do expect war to go as planned, then you shouldn't be getting involved in a war in the first place. And of course, most people say Putin shouldn't have gotten involved in this war. And okay, I do agree. This was probably not a very good move, but we'll see how it plays out. Again, it didn't go as expected. You know, most people were shocked to see how well the Ukrainians held out against the Russians. So, and Russia was expecting to have taken Kiev by now. And so it definitely didn't go as the Russians expected, but they're still making progress. It's a very, very slow grind for the Russians, but they're still gaining ground and making progress. It's slow, but they're making that progress. And remember, you know, this war is a month old. It's been going on for a month. You think of World War II, that lasted years. Wars commonly will last years. And so the question is Putin ready to commit to the time and effort that it's going to take to win this war? And that's really the question. And, you know, is he in it for the long haul? And if he is, if he's ready to commit that time and effort, he'll win eventually. You know, and people are expecting the Russian population to turn on Putin because of the sanctions. You got to understand, the sanctions are they're gonna make people angry at Putin, or the Russian people angry at Putin for a time. But as the sanctions really start to drag on, and as they really start to bite, and as they really start to hurt the Russian public, the Russian sentiment is going to change. They're going to redirect the anger towards those who are actually putting the sanctions, and that's the West. So initially they're going to be like, well, you know, Putin shouldn't have invaded. You know, now we have all these sanctions because Putin invaded. But as time goes on, that sentiment is going to shift, which is it's just the nature of people, right? That resentment towards Putin is going to be redirected towards the West. So people have this idea that the sanctions are going to wear down the Russian people and the people are going to coup and they're going to take Putin out of office. It's not going to happen. The people are going to turn their anger towards the West. And over time, you know, as more and more Russians get killed by Ukrainians, that's going to create anger especially among the soldiers who are watching their fellow soldiers die. Right now, you know, initially the soldiers didn't want to fight, but as they see more and more of their fellow soldiers get killed and maimed and brutalized by Ukrainians, because it's war is brutal. I'm not saying the Ukrainians are doing anything wrong by defending themselves, but war is brutal. And the soldiers who are witnessing the war, they're going to become more hardened. They're going to become more angry. They're going to become more resentful towards the Ukrainians. Yeah, sure, they're going to hate Putin for sending them to this war, but the Ukrainians are the ones killing their buddies. It's human psychology. And as this war goes on, you know, again, it sounds cruel, but it's like a survival of the fittest. The weak and the incompetent soldiers are the first to die, right? They get wiped out. And you saw the same thing happen in Afghanistan. When we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, you know, early on it was really easy because there were tons of incompetent soldiers we were fighting, but those died. Those guys got wiped out really quick in the beginning. And the ones who are left were veterans because they had been fighting us for a year or two, and they were much more competent, and so the only ones left were competent soldiers. And the same thing is going to happen with the Russian troops, right? A lot of the incompetent troops are going to die really early on, and they're going to die really quickly. And the ones that are left, they're going to be veterans. They're going to be hardened combat veterans because they're going to have been there for possibly a year. Who knows how long this is going to go? But they're going to have been in Ukraine for a year or so, and they're going to be angry. They're going to be hardened veterans, and they're going to be much more competent. And then you're going to see things change at that point. And the same thing's going to happen to the Russian people. Their resentment is going to be towards Putin for a time, but eventually it's going to shift towards the West because the West is the one imposing these sanctions, and they know it. And Putin he has a very effective propaganda machine in Russia. You can't underestimate that. It's going to be constant. This constant propaganda. Hey, look what the West is doing to you. They're making you starve. They're making you freeze to death. This is the West. They impose these sanctions. There's no reason for them to do this. And eventually, over time, it's like the old saying goes, you repeat a lie often enough, but it's not necessarily a lie. But if you repeat something often enough, people will take it as truth. And public opinion in Russia will shift towards a resentment towards the West for the sanctions. And this is the problem with the sanctions. They don't have this magical effect where they turn people against their leaders. Look, I mean, we've had sanctions, in Iran for years. Was there ever a coup in Iran? Is there a coup in North Korea? No, because those countries control the propaganda within their own nation, right? And it's very hard for these people to get outside information, especially after we've cut off the internet from all the Russians. We're cutting them off from Facebook and internet and all these services, these online services, even TikTok. And I don't know if they've cut them off from TikTok, but there's a lot of online services that are refusing to do business in Russia now, right? And all that achieves, like I mean, I know that they were cutting them out from OnlyFans. That's what it's called, OnlyFans. I mean, like they're shutting down OnlyFans accounts and stuff. OnlyFans is a way for people in Russia to interact with people outside of Russia. It's not the most effective way, but it is one of those means. It's one of those means to make contact with the outside world. And as Russia becomes more and more isolated, that's going to mean the Western influence that is currently in Russia is quickly going to vanish. And the only influence that's going to remain in Russia is going to be Russian influence. And that's going to be controlled by Putin. So, we're kind of sabotaging our own effort here by cutting Russia off completely, right? Because we've taken all that outside influence out. And so the population and the resentment towards the West in the Russian population is going to increase over time. And that's going to harden their resolve. The soldiers fighting in Russia are going to become more and more hardened. They're going to become more and more experienced over time, and they're going to become more and more aggressive. And that's happening already as we speak. And as that happens, there's also another factor that we have to consider. Putin chose a very poor time to invade, late winter, right? And what that did is it created, in Ukraine, you have all the snow, and the snow melts, and that creates a lot of mud. And of course, they knew about this, so Putin probably was expecting the war to go quickly, and he wasn't expecting the mud to be such a big factor. But since the Ukrainians, and more power to them, they did a great job installing the Russians and stopping the invasion. But because they were able to do that, that mud became a huge factor. The Russian tanks and the heavy armored, again, Russian armor. I mean, Russians have tons of armor. It's like the backbone of their entire military force is Russian armor, and that armor cannot drive over that muddy terrain. And you see it. This is why they stay on the roads. People are like, "Well, Russians are stupid. You're not supposed to stay on the roads like that. That makes you sitting ducks." Well, yes, of course they know that, but they have to drive on the roads. They cannot go off the roads because if they do, they get stuck in the mud. You see it. You see tons of Russian armor stuck in the mud. And so they're stuck to the roads. And you can see these long, like here in this map, you see these long stretches of red like this and like this. These are Russian columns driving on the road, traversing these roads. And again, the Russians know it's a bad idea. I mean, they're the ones getting ambushed. They're the ones getting killed on these roads. They know it's a bad idea, but they have to drive on the roads because they don't have any other option right now. But as summer progresses, as we get into spring, as we get into summer, that mud is going to dry up. And when that mud dries up, that really opens things up for the Russians and their armor. Again, their armor is going to be much more effective if it could spread out across long distances and create lines and do pushes along the line. And so as that happens, you're going to see that it's going to be much easier for the Russians to envelop these cities. They have a very hard time enveloping these cities and surrounding them because they're stuck to the roads. And that just makes them sitting ducks. But as that mud dries, they're gonna expand, right? They're gonna open up their columns, and they're gonna be able to do open warfare, which is what they're much more effective at. And then they're gonna be able to surround and siege the cities. And as we see in Mariupol, that city they're pretty much done. And according to the map, they still hold a little bit of ground, and they're, again, good for them for holding out, but they're not going to, they're starving to death. It's not a good situation for them there. And the Russians, they're not going to just drive into the city, because they learned their lesson in the Chechen War, which is what they did in Chechnya, is that they drove right into the city with all that armor, and they got destroyed. And they learned their lesson. So instead of just driving right down the middle into these cities and capturing the city center and saying, hey, we got the city now, they're going to surround the city, they're going to siege the city, and they're going to starve the population out, and they're going to break them that way. And then they'll move in and take it after the city's probably surrendered. And this is what they're doing, right? They have it surrounded, and we see them also leveling large city blocks. And the reason they're doing that is because every single building in these cities is a hardened fighting position. And again, the Russians learned their lesson in Chechnya to not just drive into the city. And so what they're going to do is they're going to level entire city blocks with mortars and artillery and missiles, and then advance. And yeah, I'm not saying it's justified, but it's not what the media is saying. They're not just indiscriminately blowing up hospitals and I'm not saying they should do this, but it's not as indiscriminate as the media is trying to portray it. They have a reason for it. And the reason for it is because they want to level entire blocks and clear the people out and then advance. Or again, they've learned their lesson before in the Chechen War, and they're not going to repeat those same mistakes. But again, as these cities begin to fall, right, Mariupol, they almost have Odessa. Odessa's been holding out, but I believe there's ships there. They're saying the ships might not engage. Odessa's holding out for now, but I believe Odessa will eventually fall. Again, that creates the land bridge that people are talking about. And then, once, again, the major cities that they're focusing on right now, Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kiev. Kiev is probably going to be one of the last cities to fall. But the major cities here in the south, as they begin to take those, and then here in the east, once they take those cities, that's going to open up everything. And then they're going to push everything towards Kiev. The mud's going to dry out, and that's going to open up the terrain for their armor, so their armor can do a push in open terrain, which is what they prefer. And then eventually they're going to surround Kiev, and they're going to siege it until they either surrender or all start starving to death. So that's their plan. And the question is, will they succeed? I would say yes. I believe Kiev will eventually fall. I could be wrong, but I do believe Kiev will eventually fall. And it'll probably be, as long as Putin is willing to, hang in there for the long haul. And it looks like he might. They've gone to talks, and again, the media is saying, oh, well, Putin's willing to talk now. No, Ukraine's actually willing to talk. Ukraine is starting to make more and more compromises in the talks because they realize the walls are closing in. They're not stupid. They know what they're up against. And so we'll see if Putin's ready to commit to the long haul. And if he does, and if he's willing to commit through the summer, that'll open things up. He'll be able to surround Kiev, and he might be able to take it. It just will take quite some time. And then, we talk about the sanctions and stuff, that it's going to break the Russian economy. Look, the Russian economy is collapsed right now. They're still collapsing. It's in a free fall. But once it hits rock bottom, there's only one way you can go, and that's up. Russia is not going to continually rely on the West for forever for all their international needs. And there are, like India, China, there are a lot of other trading partners that Russia is going to continue to trade with. Germany still hasn't closed down their oil imports or their natural gas imports because they cannot the Germans can't heat their homes without Russian fuel. They're still buying Russian natural gas. They're still funding this war. So yeah, the Russian economy is in free fall. It's going to hit rock bottom. And again, once you're at rock bottom, there's only one way you can go, and that's up. So it will start to recover. It'll be a slow recovery. It'll be a painful recovery, but it will recover. And the Russian people will start to resent the West for it. They will resent the West for what happened. But that economy will start to recover. And as the economy starts to recover, Russia's going to start to pump more and more money into their war machine. and they're going to start pumping out more vehicles and more, missiles and planes and everything. It's a wartime economy. It takes time to transition into a wartime economy. And yes, the Russian economy will be weak, but when they do transition, that's going to allow them to push more and more reinforcements into Ukraine. And it's just it's a numbers game. Ukraine just doesn't have the technology, and they don't have the weapons to hold out against Russia. We see that even in the West, there have been major hypersonic missile attacks. The money and the aid they're receiving from the West, Russia is targeting that aid. They blew up a depot for $400 million the other day of just equipment and aid, just blew it up with a hypersonic missile. And they're going to continue to do that. They're going to continue to target the convoys and the depots that is housing all of this aid that is being sent from the West. And the Ukrainians don't have very many options for defending those convoys and those depots. There's no defense against hypersonic missiles. The United States of America doesn't have a defense against hypersonic missiles right now, and that's why a year or so ago when they started talking about it in the news, there was a lot of buzz about it and panic, because it is a threat even to the United States of America. These hypersonic missiles are a threat, and if they're a threat to the United States, there's literally nothing Ukraine can do about it. They can't counter these missiles. So it's just a matter of Russia identifying a target and then just taking it out with a hypersonic missile, and that's it. It's done. And so, again, over time, this is all going to wear on the Ukrainians. Their soldiers are going to die. Their cities are going to fall. The Russian war machine is going to continue to pump more and more and more material and troops into Ukraine. And again, if Putin's committed to the long haul, and I believe he is, and he does have the means to commit to the long haul, eventually Kiev will fall. And that'll be a turning point. When Kiev falls, there will likely be negotiations. And those negotiations will decide whether the war continues or whether it ceases at that point. And we'll see what happens. And then what's going to happen? And then people are like, okay, even if he does capture Kiev and he captures large portions of Ukraine, he can't control the population. And fair enough. But you also have to consider most of these cities are evacuating. I mean, large numbers of people are leaving these cities. So there's fewer people in the cities. When there's fewer people in the cities, there's fewer people to resist the occupation. And on top of that, there's something very interesting, and I believe it's a tactic that the Russians are employing, and it's reported here. Mariupol Council, Russian army forcibly moves thousands of Mariupol residents to Russia. The civilians were allegedly taken to camps where Russians checked their phones and documents, and then forcibly moved some of them to remote cities in Russia. So you have the people evacuating, and then you have the people who are going to die during the siege, and then the people who are left, you have the Russians exporting them into like remote cities in Russia. You've depopulated the city. You can possibly import people from the more Russia-friendly regions. You can import those people into the city, even if it's half and half. If only half the people in the city support Russia, that's enough to counterbalance the other half who don't. And then it's very hard to organize an effective, resistance and insurgents when you have half the people in the city who actually support the Russian occupation. Again, this is what they want to do. This is, it's reported here. They want to convert the cities into pro-Russian cities. They're going to replace the governments, and they're going to replace the population. At least that's what I suspect they're going to do. And in order to convert these cities into pro-Russian cities, and that'll help them tame the city, and it'll help them occupy the city. Again, that's not an option people in the United States had, right? When we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's no way we can convert that population. There's nobody in the United States who's going to move to Iraq or move to Afghanistan to live there. It's just not going to happen. So the people who are locally there, I mean, there's no replacing that population. Again, the United States wouldn't have been able to forcibly move thousands and thousands of residents anyways and still maintain, good relations with the international community. It just would not have happened. But Russia doesn't care. So they're going to do it. I mean, this is their alternative to just mass execution squads, and obviously nobody wants to see that. And the Russians, I don't even know if the Russians would be so daring as to resort to such extreme measures, but they are exporting people from these cities. And this may be an attempt by the Russians in order to morph the anti-Russian cities into pro-Russian cities. Again, the more anti-Russians you move out of the city and the more pro-Russians you move into the city, it just makes it that much easier to control. So, do I believe Russia is going to win the war? Yes, I do. They just, again, if they commit to the long haul, things are bad for Russia and things are bad for Putin right now. But again, they've about bottomed out. They've about hit rock bottom. The West has put on just about all the sanctions they're willing to put on. Germany is not going to sanction Russia, at least not going to sanction their oil exports, because if they were going to do it, they would have done it already. So all the sanctions that the West can put in place, we've pretty much done it. There isn't much more we can do to attack Russia economically. I mean, we can start to close ports, but I mean that gets very hairy. Right? You try to, blockade Russian ports and things like that gets real hairy. And Russia still has, I'm not going to say allies, but countries that are still willing to trade and still willing to do business with them. And what are we going to do? Sanction India? Sanction China because they still chose to do business with Russia? It's not going to happen. That's insane. That's definitely a way to trigger World War III. Or just to harden the resolve of China and India and Russia as some sort of NATO alliance. I mean, that'll just make everything worse. We don't want to create a world that's increasingly more isolated. We want the world to be more open and cooperative because that allows for the dialogue that has prevented massive wars up until this point. And we want to continue that. But, if poor decisions are made by the world leaders, that can go away. So I think I've pretty much touched on everything I wanted to touch on here. Russia, I do believe, is going to win this war. The Ukrainians have far exceeded expectations. And it's great that they've done it. I mean, I'm not trying to discount what they've accomplished or discredit or dismiss it. They've accomplished great things in defending their nation. And they've made great sacrifices in defending their nation. But I'm not going to come out here and repeat what the media is saying, which has become just propaganda at this point, and say, oh yeah, Russia is on the ropes and Ukrainians are really going to take them out and Putin's done for and the people are going to execute him and remove him from office. That's fantasy. We really have to look at this realistically. We really have to tamp down our expectations, and we really have to understand what the Ukrainians are up against. Because if we take this fantasy outlook of it, you begin to make poor decisions. If you have a more grounded and realistic outlook, that allows you to make better decisions. And we need that grounded and realistic outlook. We need to get rid of the propaganda. We need to stop the propaganda. We need to end the talking points. And we need to take a realistic look at what's happening. Russia is conquering Ukraine. They're slowly conquering Ukraine, and it's going much slower than they expected, but they are conquering Ukraine, and they're winning. The Ukrainians have made some offensive moves, but they don't have a strong enough army to create a counteroffensive that is going to drive Russia out of their land. Their army is not strong enough to do that. And Russia will continue to slowly make gains until they've taken at least eastern Ukraine. And they're going to take Kiev, and when they do, and they've taken Kiev and eastern Ukraine, we're probably going to see some more talks. And Belarus is likely going to get involved too. I don't know if it's here anymore, but I remember seeing something about a convoy from Belarus heading towards Ukraine. People said, "Oh, well, the Belarusian army is defecting. They're opposing it." Okay, again, road bumps, but Belarus is controlled by a dictator. He'll fire everybody who doesn't want to fight. He'll replace those people with new recruits, and then he'll push into Ukraine. And it's going to take some time, but likely Belarus is going to get involved here. So that's another front Ukraine has to deal with. So we'll see. Again, we need to control our expectations, and we need to have a realistic outlook. Russia has the means to win this war. That is definitely my conclusion here. And if we want to be able to have a favorable outcome from Ukraine, we need to understand the situation. Okay, that's it for now. I will have more later if I have any more insight in the near future.